The tow truck's reverse alarm pierced the morning mist, its mechanical arm hovering over my private dock like a predatory bird ready to strike. Flanked by 3 patrol cars, their flashing lights turned the serene lakeside into a chaotic, strobe-lit spectacle. At the heart of it all stood a woman in a hot pink visor, arms folded with the confidence of a director orchestrating a high-stakes rescue, except this was no rescue, just a towing ambush. Barefoot on my boat's deck, coffee mug in hand, I watched the absurdity unfold with a mix of disbelief and amusement. The officer stepped forward, clipboard at the ready, asking if I was the owner of the illegally parked vessel. I didn't utter a word, just handed over my ID, emblazoned with Harbormaster, Lakewood Authority. His expression crashed, faster than Karen's last HOA election bid, and in an instant, the 911 circus she'd sicked on me morphed into her own humiliating public parade. It all kicked off 3 days earlier, as these tales often do, with something maddeningly trivial. I'd secured the Wind Whisperer, my beloved 40-foot sloop, years in the making at my legally owned slip. The lake gleamed like glass, the sky stretched cloudless and blue, and the air carried that sweet blend of cedar and fresh water. I was tweaking the mooring lines, giving the hull a final sand, when the unmistakable stomp of rubber-soled entitlement echoed down the dock. Enter Karen, the HOA vice president, self-crowned protector of aesthetic order, and relentless foe of lakeside joy. She marched toward me, heels clicking like a menacing metronome, her eyes raking over my boat as if it had insulted her entire lineage. "You can't park that eyesore here," she barked, skipping any pretense of a greeting. I feigned confusion, glancing around before pointing to the sign, my name and title bold just 2 feet away. "I own this dock," I said, keeping my tone steady. Have you ever faced an HOA overreach like this, or battled a neighbor's petty vendetta? Which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with an HOA. We will narrate your story on our channel. "Not according to HOA bylaws, section 6 and 2, she retorted, pulling out a laminated cheat sheet she carried like scripture. It says, "Boats that obstruct lakefront view symmetry are subject to immediate citation and removal." I couldn't help but laugh, not just a chuckle, but a full-throated laugh that made her eye twitch. You can't make this stuff up. The HOA had invented a new term, lakefront view symmetry, to justify harassing a perfectly legal boat owner on his own property. Karen didn't appreciate being laughed at. She stormed off, her phone already out. I figured she'd write an angry email, maybe post another rant on the community message board. I didn't expect her to call 911 and report my boat as a hazard to public safety. So, when I woke up to the sound of emergency vehicles rolling up the private access road, I couldn't believe it at first. I thought maybe there had been an accident nearby, but no, they were here for my boat. The lead officer approached with a cautious gait, clearly already confused about what he was walking into. According to dispatch, there was a report of an unauthorized boat blocking emergency egress to the lake. The problem was there is no such thing as emergency egress on a lake dock. And there's definitely no law being broken by a boat that's not even in the navigation channel. Before I could say anything, Karen burst onto the scene like she was starring in her own courtroom drama. "That's it!" she shrieked, pointing at my boat. "It's been illegally docked for 3 days and it's ruining our lake's visual character." The tow truck driver looked unsure. The cops looked even more confused. I let her ramble for a solid minute, waving her HOA paperwork like she was holding a court summon. Then I handed over my ID. The officer blinked twice as he read it. "You're the Harbormaster?" "Yep," I said with a grin. "I regulate and approve every mooring and docking structure on this lake. including hers. Karen's face turned red, so fast it looked like someone flipped a switch. She sputtered something about fake IDs and forged titles, but the officer was already waving off the tow truck. "Ma'am, this is a private dock owned and operated by someone with jurisdiction over this entire lake. You can't enforce HOA bylaws here." But the HOA handbook says. She tried again, her voice rising into that high-pitched wail she reserves for when she realizes she's lost. The crowd had started to gather by then, neighbors with coffee cups, joggers who had paused to see the show. Even a kid on a paddleboard floated nearby just to hear Karen crash and burn. As the police wrapped up and left, Karen stood there fuming. Her perfect power play had backfired in public, and she wasn't the kind to go down quietly. The next morning, I found a citation taped to my front gate, a formal HOA violation for non-conforming nautical structures. She decided to escalate. I wasn't worried. Karen didn't understand that this wasn't just about a boat. It wasn't about property lines or aesthetic. This was about control, and I had way more of it than she realized. I went inside, made another coffee, and pulled out the binder I kept on my desk. Inside were all the maps, permits, enforcement logs, and municipal records tied to the lake. I didn't just oversee the docks. I was the senior official for all water-based activities within a 10-mi radius. Karen thought she'd won some moral victory by getting the HOA involved. What she didn't know was that in trying to remove my boat, she had just put her own dock under the microscope. This was just the opening move, and she had played it poorly. By sunset, my inbox had a dozen new messages, neighbors forwarding Karen's posts accusing me of abusing my power and using insider status to dodge rules. I didn't respond, not yet. I let the silence stew. Let her allies rally. Let the HOA board feel emboldened, because while they plotted their next desperate move, I was planning something far more permanent. This wasn't just going to be a petty lake feud. This was going to be a full-on nautical chess match, and I already had them in check. The next few days unfolded like an absurd soap opera, with Karen as the star, producer, and overly dramatic narrator. After her public defeat at the hands of the local police and the quick dismissal of the tow truck she summoned, she didn't retreat. Oh no, she doubled down. If she couldn't get rid of my boat through law enforcement, she'd do it through bureaucracy. She activated the full power of her favorite weapon, the HOA. She called an emergency board meeting, and by emergency I mean she dragged the other 4 board members, 2 of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, into her living room and forced them to vote on a temporary view disturbance clause. It was complete nonsense, of course, designed specifically to target my docked boat. But Karen didn't care about logic or legality. She cared about control, and humiliation had only made her more determined. The next morning, I received an email with the subject line, "Urgent notice of non-compliance." It was from the HOA, formatted like a government notice, but written in Comic Sans, which made it hard to take seriously. The content claimed that my docked boat violated Article 7, C Section 11 aesthetic, view continuity, and that I had 72 hours to vacate the obstructing vessel or face daily fines. I stared at the message for a full minute before laughing out loud. It was so brazenly fabricated, so legally impotent, that I actually forwarded it to a friend at the County Water Access Office. He replied 10 minutes later with a simple sentence. "I hope she tries to enforce this in front of a judge." But I knew Karen wouldn't stop. That's the thing about people like her. They treat resistance like a personal insult. So I started documenting everything. I printed out every email. I took time-stamped photos of my dock, my boat, and the lake view from multiple angles. I recorded my conversations with HOA reps, and I updated a folder labeled Karen Campaign every time something new arrived. It wasn't just for defense, it was preparation for a counter-strike. 2 days later, a strange man showed up at my dock. He was in a blue shirt with a patch that read Dock Inspector, though it looked like it had been sewn on that morning. He had a clipboard and a camera and was busy taking pictures of my boat from weird angles, like he was trying to make it look bigger and more menacing than it was. I asked who he was and who sent him. He said the HOA had hired him to perform a visual obstruction survey. When I asked for his credentials, he fumbled with his wallet and handed me a business card with no company name, just Gary Compliance Solutions and a Yahoo email address. I told him politely to leave, or I'd have to report him for trespassing. He left, but not before trying to snap one last dramatic shot of my boat's stern like it was a crime scene. That evening, Karen proudly posted on the neighborhood forum that an official obstruction audit was underway and that action would be taken soon. The replies were mixed. A few of her usual cheerleaders clapped with emojis, but the rest of the comments were skeptical. One neighbor named Lily wrote, "You mean the Harbormaster's boat that's been there for 10 years without a problem?" Another neighbor asked, "Isn't his dock older than the HO itself?" Karen ignored those and doubled down, claiming that she was protecting the character of the lake from rogue bores and entitled rule breakers. The next morning, I caught another strange development. Someone had installed a small, fake security camera aimed at my dock, mounted on a tree behind Karen's fence. It was clearly a plastic decoy, but the message was loud and clear. She was watching, or wanted me to think she was. I smiled and waved at it, just in case she was actually on the other end, watching from behind a curtain. I had no doubt she had. A live feed on every neighbor's lawn. I decided it was time to escalate in a smarter way. I didn't need to confront Karen directly anymore. I had a better plan. That night, I emailed the local Marina Association, the County Dock Permitting Office, and the Lakewood Development Committee. I explained the situation in formal language, attaching documents, dates, pictures, and statements from neighbors. I knew these departments didn't care about HLA drama, but they cared deeply about unauthorized enforcement attempts and misrepresentation of authority, and Karen had stepped far over that line. A few days later, the first blow landed. An officer from the County Office of Dock and Mooring came by and asked to speak with me. He was cordial and professional, and I walked him through everything. After reviewing the documentation, he said he had all he needed, but the look on his face was something between amused and appalled. Before he left, he casually mentioned that the HOA had no registered jurisdiction over lake mooring rights, and any attempts to enforce them could open them up to formal investigation. I nodded and offered him a coffee for the road. Meanwhile, the neighborhood gossip mill kicked into overdrive. Karen's actions were no longer just about my boat. People started sharing their own stories. One resident told me Karen fined them for having a kayak with faded paint. Another said she tried to issue a ticket for a paddleboard left on a grass pad. Someone else claimed she measured the height of their dock chairs with a ruler. The whispers became a chorus, and soon people began pushing back. It wasn't just me anymore. Karen had declared war on the whole lake. Still, she wasn't done. One afternoon, I spotted a small group gathered at the clubhouse. Karen had scheduled a special HOA town hall and invited only her most loyal supporters. I walked by just close enough to hear snippets of her speech. She was riling them up about outsiders, non-compliant watercraft, and reclaiming our lakefront values. It sounded more like a campaign rally than a homeowners meeting, but what she didn't realize was that outside that little room, the tide was turning. That night, my inbox lit up again. A blogger from a local community paper had reached out. She'd seen a Facebook thread about the dock wars and wanted to know more. I didn't confirm anything, but I didn't deny anything either. I simply said that as the Harbormaster, I was committed to fair and legal enforcement of all boating regulations. The next morning, the headline read, "Harbormaster battles Ho Queen over dock dispute." The photo was a zoomed-in screenshot of Karen red-faced and shouting, likely taken during the police fiasco. I knew she saw it because 20 minutes after it was posted, Karen stood at the edge of my dock again, staring at me with the intensity of a vulture who just realized the prey wasn't dead. I gave her a polite wave. She didn't wave back. The storm she'd created was now too big for her to control, and the more she tried to tighten her grip, the more support she lost. I wasn't just defending my boat anymore. I was defending the right of every resident on this lake to live without fear of arbitrary HOA tantrums disguised as rules. But the real fun hadn't even started yet, because the next board meeting wasn't going to be about enforcing Karen's fantasies. It was going to be about exposing them. And I was preparing something that would not only end her campaign, but would also flip the entire game in my favor. She thought she was in charge of the lake. She was about to find out what happens when you try to tow the wrong man's boat. The sun was setting on the lake in a haze of orange and gold as I sat on the deck of the Wind Whisperer, flipping through the last of my files. Everything was in place. For the past week, I had gathered, sorted, printed, and annotated more documentation than most small law offices see in a month. Karen thought she could drag me into an HOA dispute built on fake rules and laughable citations. But I wasn't just going to win this battle, I was going to use it to dismantle the entire narrative she'd built around herself. The upcoming Lakewood District Enforcement Board meeting was the perfect stage. Karen had no idea that I wasn't just some guy with a boat and a title. I was the chair of the Regional Enforcement Committee. I didn't just follow the rules, I helped write them. The board meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. at the Lakewood Community Center, a wide hall with glass walls that overlooked the water she so desperately wanted to control. As I walked in, dressed casually but confidently, I noticed the room was already filled with people, far more than usual. Some sat quietly, others whispered in anticipation. Word had gotten around. Karen's recent antics had stirred up enough controversy that even the residents who normally avoided HOA politics had shown up just to see what would happen. I spotted Karen near the front, flanked by 2 loyal followers. She wore a pristine white blazer, a gold scarf, and a smug expression that practically begged to be shattered. The meeting opened with routine updates, budget approvals, landscaping updates, and one brief discussion about invasive plant control near the East Shore. Then it was time for public grievances and compliance discussions. Karen wasted no time. She stood dramatically, cleared her throat as though she were about to deliver a Shakespearean monologue, and began speaking in that falsely polite tone she used when trying to mask her contempt. She spoke of the lake's decline in visual uniformity, the dangers of dock clutter, and the alleged impact of unregulated watercraft on the neighborhood's tranquility. Her voice carried bolstered by the microphone, and she presented a flimsy slideshow of blurry photos, all taken at odd angles to exaggerate the size of my boat. She didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who she meant. The slideshow ended with a photo of my dock from 2 weeks ago, taken during a thunderstorm, of course, so the lighting made it look ominous. She sat down, clearly pleased with herself, and the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then I stood, walked slowly to the front of the room, and placed my binder on the podium. I didn't use a slideshow. I didn't need pictures with weird lighting or manufactured drama. I had facts, jurisdiction, and legal authority. I began by calmly introducing myself, not as a neighbor or even a boat owner, but as the acting Harbormaster for Lakewood District, a title given to me by the Regional Waterways and Public Access Commission. I explained what that meant. I oversaw all lake activities, docking permits and compliance inspections within the district. I noted that while the HOA could enforce rules within private community spaces, they had zero legal authority over water, zoning, mowing rights or lakefront usage that fell under county jurisdiction. Karen squirmed visibly. I hadn't even reached the best part. I pulled out a color-coded permit map that stretched nearly 6 feet wide and laid it across the front table. With a red marker, I highlighted every dock in the HOA's jurisdiction and explained how each one was registered with the county. Then I pointed to Karen's dock. According to records, it was added after the original lot permit expired and without a proper environmental review. Not only was her dock out of compliance, but it also violated shoreline preservation regulations due to an unauthorized concrete extension poured just 2 summers ago. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen turned pale. One of her supporters leaned away from her ever so slightly. I wasn't finished. I then read aloud a selection of anonymous neighbor complaints, each one verified and time-stamped. Reports of Karen issuing false citations, threatening to fine children for using paddleboards, trespassing to measure dock dimensions, and even trying to push someone's canoe away from the community beach. I held up screenshots of her social media rants, some borderline slanderous, accusing neighbors of vandalism, cheating the system, and being part of what she bizarrely called a dock cartel. The final blow came when I revealed that the county had opened an official inquiry into the HOA's misuse of authority over shared resources. If the HOA was found to be operating outside its legal bounds, the consequences would include dissolution of certain board powers and mandatory oversight from a regional authority. That meant Karen's thief could be stripped from her permanently. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't point fingers, I just let the truth sit in the room like an immovable anchor. When I finished, the board members looked stunned. Even the ones who usually aligned with Karen were nervously flipping through their notes, realizing that associating with her could backfire fast. Karen tried to respond. She stood, her voice trembling, accusing me of fabricating documents and waging a personal vendetta. She shouted something about this being an ambush and threatened legal action, but the audience wasn't buying it. A woman in the back muttered, "There she goes again." A man near the window shook his head and whispered to his wife, "She really picked the wrong guy to mess with." The board chair, who had remained quiet during my presentation, finally spoke. He thanked both sides for their input, then recommended an immediate suspension of all new HOA enforcement measures related to docks and boats until the county concluded its investigation. He also advised Karen to step down from her enforcement role pending further review. The motion passed unanimously. Karen looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth hung open as she slowly gathered her things, her golden scarf catching awkwardly on the arm of her chair. No one stood with her. She left alone, and no one followed. After the meeting ended, neighbors approached me one by one to thank me. Some shared stories of their own Karen encounters. Others offered to help if she retaliated. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of her aggression start to lift from the community. I hadn't just defended my boat, I had dismantled the power structure she had built on intimidation and fake rules. But I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't surrender. They regroup, they lick their wounds and come back with lawsuits, smear campaigns, or worse. The difference now was that the community wasn't on her side anymore, and I had more support than ever. That night, I sat on my dock, watching the lights reflect off the lake's surface. The breeze was calm, the stars clear. My boat rocked gently in its rightful place, Somewhere across the lake, Karen was likely plotting her next move, but for now peace had returned to the water. She wanted a war. I gave her the truth, and in the process, I turned the very rules she tried to weaponize into the chain that unraveled her entire game. 3 days after the board meeting, I woke up to find a flyer taped to my mailbox and half the neighborhood's gate. In bold red letters, it announced the first ever Lake Heritage Festival hosted by the HOA. A list of events followed: doe-side yoga, a pie baking contest, kayak relay races, and a heritage speech by none other than Karen herself. At the bottom, there was a carefully worded sentence in celebration of a harmonious lakefront, free from visual pollution and non-conforming vessels. I nearly choked on my coffee. Karen was spinning her humiliation into a public redemption art. This festival wasn't a celebration, it was a smoke screen. Worse, the date she picked landed on the exact day county inspectors were scheduled to conduct the dock compliance review I had triggered with my formal request. It was clear now, Karen thought if she flooded the lakefront with decorations, activity, tents, and HOA volunteers, she could either delay the inspection or make it politically toxic to proceed. Unfortunately for her, county inspectors weren't swayed by cupcakes and matching t-shirt. That morning, just as HOA volunteers were setting up speakers and hanging streamers from trees, a dark green SUV pulled up. 3 officials stepped out, clipboards in hand, wearing khaki vests with county infrastructure and waterway enforcement printed across the back. I happened to be in the front yard tuning my pressure washer when they arrived. I greeted them politely and offered coffee. One of them, a middle-aged man named Russell, thanked me and asked where to begin. I pointed him toward Karen's section of the lake and handed him a map I had marked with coordinates, dates of construction, and known irregularities. I wasn't exaggerating anything. I didn't need to. Karen had broken enough real rules that I didn't have to invent a single one. Word of the inspectors spread quickly, and by midday, Karen stormed down the shoreline in full festival attire, white slacks, blue blouse, and a sun hat so wide it looked like it could serve as a lifeboat. She intercepted the inspectors near the community dock with an exaggerated smile and an even more exaggerated speech. She welcomed them on behalf of the Lakewood Residents Council, a name she invented on the spot, and offered them baked goods from the festival booth. When they politely declined and asked her to step aside while they documented the docks, her smile cracked ever so slightly. I watched from a distance as one of the inspectors paced along her CU wall, measuring the concrete extension with a digital laser tool. Another snapped photos of the stairway leading into the water, which had been constructed without a permit. Karen hovered behind them, trying to explain that everything had been approved years ago, though she had no documents to support the claim. By mid-afternoon, the inspectors had visited every lakefront property in the HOA zone. They took notes, recorded interviews, and measured structural extensions. The festival had continued awkwardly in the background, with music playing off-key through an underpowered speaker system and guests milling about trying to enjoy the activities while tension simmered in the air. A few folks whispered updates as they saw inspectors photographing exposed electrical conduits on Karen's dock. Even her closest allies were keeping their distance. It was clear the wind had changed. Later that evening, after the festival had wrapped and the inflatable arch was being deflated by frustrated volunteers, Karen received a formal notification. The inspectors had left a printed summary in her mailbox with an orange sticker marked "Priority Violation." It cited 3 major infractions: unauthorized shoreline modification, unlicensed concrete installation, and illegal runoff drainage into the lake. There was no warning letter, no grace period, just a deadline, 14 days to remove or modify the illegal additions, or face a fine of up to $5,000. I don't know what her face looked like when she read it, but I imagined it twisted between rage and disbelief. But the real impact wasn't just the violation notice, it was the immediate suspension of her dock's usage rights. As part of the county enforcement process, all activities originating from non-compliant docks were put on hold until the issues were resolved. That meant Karen, who had once tried to tow my perfectly legal boat, was now barred from using her own. Her jet ski, her kayak, even her floaty chair had to stay dry. She wasn't even allowed to tie up her pontoon boat overnight. The irony couldn't have been more satisfying. As word spread through the neighborhood, people started approaching me more freely. Some offered thanks, others asked questions about dock compliance and how to ensure they were on the right side of the law. I spent a full afternoon helping one elderly couple fill out a permit application they didn't know they needed. One family brought over banana bread as a thank you. I hadn't just exposed Karen. I had restored a sense of community that she had been quietly eroding for years with her arbitrary citations and silent intimidation. A few days after the inspection, I decided to make a statement of my own. With the help of a local contractor friend, I installed a series of solar-powered LED lights along my dock, synchronized to create a slow, pulsating wave effect after dark. It was beautiful but subtle, a tasteful nod to modern lakefront design. Then I added a small metal plaque near the waterline. It read, "In honor of Ho Karen for inspiring a better harbor." It wasn't vandalism, it wasn't petty, it was art. And legally, there wasn't a single thing she could do about it. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. She filed 2 appeals with the county, both denied within 48 hours. She sent a furious group email accusing the inspection team of bias and me of manipulating the system for personal revenge. She even suggested that I had paid off the inspectors, a claim so ridiculous even her closest supporters stopped replying. Her online rants grew longer, more erratic. She accused the HOA board of betrayal, the lake of being cursed, and even hinted at filing a civil rights complaint because visual harmony is an unspoken spiritual right. But something even more satisfying happened next. The HLA board, under pressure from the community and fearful of legal repercussions, voted to freeze all enforcement actions not explicitly backed by municipal or county law. That included every fake citation Karen had issued, every bizarre measurement, guideline she invented, and every pending complaint she had launched against innocent neighbors. Her power was stripped, not just weakened, obliterated. I started receiving emails from residents I barely knew. They shared stories of how Karen had fined them for wind chimes, for drying towels on their porch, even for allowing visiting grandchildren to splash in the shallow end of the lake. With her reign effectively over, these neighbors felt like they could finally breathe. A few of them joined me for coffee one Saturday morning, sitting on my dock under the rising sun. We laughed about the madness and talked about building a proper community group, one that supported residents instead of threatening them. 2 weeks passed in near silence from Karen. The lake was calm again, not just in the way the water lapped against the shore, but in the mood of the community. Neighbors waved more often. Conversations happened without fear of sudden HOA citations. Kids played near the docks without being scolded for noise violations. It felt like we'd collectively come up for air after years of being quietly suffocated. Karen's absence from daily life wasn't just noted, it was celebrated in small ways. People set up lawn chairs without measuring tape. A family hung wind chimes, shaped like fish bones. Someone even tied balloons to their mailbox on their daughter's birthday without a single warning letter showing up afterward. But even with the peace, I knew Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. Not truly. When a person builds their identity on control and loses that power, they don't fade away, they flail. And sure enough, the flailing began exactly 17 days after. Her HOA enforcement privileges were suspended. It started with a letter, not from the HOA, not from the county, but from Karen's newly hired attorney. The envelope arrived certified with my full name on it and a stack of papers inside. A civil lawsuit had been filed in small claims court. The charge, defamation, harassment, and willful interference with Karen's residential enjoyment. I had to read it twice to stop laughing. Her accusations were more dramatic than any courtroom drama on TV. She claimed I had staged a public shaming campaign, manipulated inspectors with falsified complaints, and even constructed visual hazards on my dock to deliberately cause emotional distress. My plaque, the one dedicated to her, was listed as an example of public humiliation and symbolic aggression. According to her, it had caused irreparable damage to her reputation and sleep quality. She also included screenshots from the local blog, Facebook comments, and even a blurry photo of me helping a neighbor fix their kayak, which she labeled as community coercion under false pretenses. The entire thing read like a bad high school creative writing assignment, but legally it meant I had to respond. I wasn't worried. I had everything documented, but part of me couldn't believe how far she was willing to go just to keep swinging after the bell had rung. Her case was flimsy at best, laughable at worst, but the court system didn't care about drama. They cared about evidence. And Karen, in all her arrogance, had left a trail of it. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the small county courtroom wearing the same calm expression I'd had on the dock. That morning, she called the cop. Karen arrived in a beige pantsuit and sunglasses indoors, followed by a young attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. There were a few spectators, neighbors who had heard, and couldn't resist showing up to watch the climax of the drama. The judge, a tired-looking man in his 60s, called us to order and began reading the case summary. He sighed more than once while skimming the accusations. Then Karen's lawyer stood and gave a heartfelt, overly rehearsed speech about emotional distress and community bullying. He dramatically referenced the dock plaque, framed it like a tombstone for Karen's good name, and ended with a plea for justice and monetary relief. When it was my turn, I didn't deliver a speech. I just handed over a binder. It included county inspection results, timestamps from public records, printed copies of HOA rules, a list of every time Karen had filed false complaints, and a map showing how her dock violated 3 separate state regulations. I also provided a brief written statement confirming I had never once issued a threat, incited a group, or contacted her outside of responding to her own actions. I concluded with a copy of the official state acknowledgement that I was the active Harbormaster of the Lake District, certified and dated. The judge barely took 10 minutes after closing arguments. He looked over the papers, removed his glasses, and addressed the court. "The claims brought forth," he said flatly, "are unsubstantiated and in many cases appear retaliatory." He dismissed the case and issued a warning to Karen about potential abuse of the court process. Then, to everyone's surprise, he ordered her to pay my legal fees. She froze in place, mouth slightly open, her lawyer awkwardly adjusting his tie beside her. One of the neighbors in the back gasped, followed by a barely muffled chuckle. Karen didn't storm out. She didn't shout. She simply gathered her papers, turned on her heel, and walked straight into the back of the courtroom door, mistaking it for the exit. The dull thud it made echoed longer than it should have. By the time she found the real exit, half the room was holding in laughter like school children in detention. The final piece of poetic justice came a week later. A notice was posted at the community clubhouse announcing that Karen had resigned from the HOA board, effective immediately. There was no thank you message, no farewell post, not even a passive-aggressive quote about leadership, just a dry one-line sentence under a header that read, HOA Leadership Update. No one clapped, no one cried, the lake simply exhaled. She was, done. But the story wasn't. The State Conservation Department finally released their findings from the environmental violation investigation. Karen's dock had in fact encroached upon a protected aquatic plant reserve. Not only was it illegal, but it also violated a restoration project funded by the state 2 years earlier. The penalty, mandatory removal of the illegal extension, replanting of the disrupted area under supervision, and a fine of $7,000. It was the final nail delivered not by me, but by the very system she thought she could control. Neighbors came, together afterward, to talk about electing a new board. This time they chose people with actual experience, compassion, and a desire for unity. I was offered a seat on the board, but I declined. I told them I'd be happy to advise when needed, but my job was still on the water. I was the Harbormaster after all, not a politician. That weekend we held a quiet community gathering by the lake. No banners, no forced event, just grilled food, laughter, and kids splashing in the shallows. Someone brought out a guitar. A couple brought drinks. It wasn't a festival. It was real. Karen watched from her upstairs window. Her blinds twitched, and for a moment her silhouette lingered, but she didn't come outside. Not this time. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the lake turned to glass, I stood on my dock with a cup of coffee in hand and took it all in. The silence, the warmth, the absolute stillness of victory, not loud or gloating, just firm and permanent. Karen had tried to tow my boat, destroy my peace, and bully the lake into her image. She failed, not because I fought louder, but because I knew the rules better. She underestimated the one person on that lake who could see beyond her theatre. And in doing so, she lost everything she built on illusion. Sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens or handcuff. Sometimes it comes in the form of a revoked dock permit, a dismissed lawsuit, and a lake that no longer fears its own reflection.